I never thought I'd find myself alone in the school after dark, but there I was. It all started when I missed the last bus home because I stayed late finishing a project. The janitor was nowhere to be found, and all the lights in the hallways were flickering like they hadn't been maintained in years. My phone was dead, of course, so I couldn't call anyone. I figured I'd just walk home, but as I passed the gym, I heard something. It sounded like footsteps. Slow, steady footsteps, like someone was pacing. I froze for a second, trying to listen closely. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. Just more footsteps. They stopped right behind the gym door. I took a step closer, and the door creaked open on its own. "Okay, nope," I said to myself. "Not doing this." I turned and started heading back toward the main entrance, but something didn't feel right. It was too quiet. I glanced back, and I swear I saw a shadow dart across the hallway behind me. When I reached the front doors, I pushed them with all my strength, but they wouldn't budge. The place was locked up tight. Panic started to creep in. I banged on the door, hoping maybe the janitor would hear me, but nothing. The windows were too high to climb out of, and I had no idea if any other doors would even be open. I remembered there was a side exit near the science wing, so I made my way there. The halls felt longer, darker. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected something to jump out. But when I got to the side door, of course, it was locked too. Seriously? What kind of school locks every door? I muttered. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. This time they were closer. I ran, heart pounding, back toward the main office, thinking maybe I could find a spare key or something. The office lights were off, but I could see the faint glow of a computer screen. Weird, since the place should have been shut down by now. I pushed open the office door and froze. Sitting at the receptionist's desk was a figure. Someone dressed in a school uniform, just sitting there, staring at the computer screen. But something was off. Their back was hunched, their hair hanging down over their face. I said, my voice shaky. "Do you know how to get out of here?" No response. I took a step closer, and that's when they slowly turned their head. Their eyes were dark, hollow. It was like looking at a shadow, wearing human skin. I stumbled back, tripping over a chair, and scrambled to my feet. The figure stood up, but didn't move toward me. It just watched me with those empty eyes as I bolted out of the office and down the hall. Chapter 4. Hall of Whispers. As soon as I left the office, the air seemed to thicken around me. My footsteps echoed in the empty hallway, louder than they should have been, and with every step, my nerves were getting tighter. I tried to steady my breathing, but it was like the whole building was closing in. The walls seemed narrower, and the flickering lights overhead made the shadows jump and twist like they had a life of their own. Then I heard it, faint at first, but definitely there. Whispering. I stopped in my tracks, my heart racing. It wasn't coming from behind me or in front of me. It was all around. It sounded like voices, several of them, overlapping, talking low and fast, just enough that I couldn't make out any actual words. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt that instinctual chill, the kind that tells you something's not right, like your body knows before your brain can process it. I spun around, scanning the hallway for anyone, anything, but there was no one. Only the whispers. They grew louder as I stood there, like they were getting closer, pressing in on me. I turned back and started walking faster, hoping I could outrun whatever this was, but the voices followed. No matter how fast I moved, they were there, growing more intense with each step. The words were still unclear, but every now and then, I'd catch a phrase. "He's coming." My stomach dropped. I didn't know who he was, but I sure as hell didn't want to stick around to find out. I started running again, but my legs felt heavier with each step, like I was moving through quicksand. The whispers seemed to wrap around me, filling my head until it felt like they were right in my ears. I covered them with my hands, desperate to block out the sound, but it didn't help. It was like they were inside my mind now, creeping into every corner of my thoughts. I turned a corner, desperate to find a way out, but the hall seemed endless. The lockers on either side of me stretched on forever, disappearing into the darkness ahead. It didn't make any sense. I'd been down this hallway 100 times before, and it was never this long. The lights overhead flickered more violently now, some going completely dark as I passed under them. The whispers were louder than ever, echoing inside my skull. He's coming? No, 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 I whispered to myself, trying to keep it together, but panic was taking over. My heartbeat was deafening, almost louder than the voices. My breaths came in short gasps, my lungs feeling like they couldn't get enough air. Suddenly, I tripped. My knee hit the hard floor with a sharp pain, and the flashlight the janitor had given me rolled away, its beams spinning wildly across the walls. For a second, everything went silent. The whispers stopped. The air felt heavy, like the building was holding its breath, waiting for something. I scrambled to my feet, my knee throbbing, and grabbed the flashlight, but when I stood up, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. A shadow moved at the far end of the hallway, just at the edge of the light's reach. I froze, shining the beam directly at it, but whatever it was stayed just out of sight, as if it knew the light could hurt it. "Who's there?" I called out, but my voice cracked with fear. The shadow didn't respond. It just stood there, watching, waiting. My mind raced. I didn't know whether to run or stand still. The whispers hadn't started again, but the silence was worse. I could feel the tension in the air, like something was about to snap. I took a step back, my eyes locked on the shadow, and as soon as I did, it moved. Quick like a blur, closer now. I stumbled backward, the flashlight shaking in my hand, casting frantic beams across the walls and floor. My back hit the cold metal of the lockers, and for a second I was pinned, too scared to move. Then, without warning, the whispers surged back, louder than before. The same phrase echoed, clear now, over and over, as if the building itself was speaking to me. "He's coming. He's coming." I couldn't take it anymore. I broke into a full sprint, not caring where I was going, just needing to get as far away from that thing as possible. My shoes slapped against the floor, the sound of my frantic footsteps mixing with the whispers that followed me. The lights above flickered wildly as I ran, plunging the hallway into patches of darkness. I turned corner after corner, but the school was like a maze now, the hallways looping back on themselves. No matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was right behind me, following, always just out of sight, waiting for the moment I'd stumble again. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw a door at the end of the hallway. It looked different from the others, older somehow, like it didn't belong in the modern school. I didn't care. I charged toward it, my lungs burning, praying it wasn't locked. My hand reached out and grabbed the cold metal handle. And then silence. The whispers stopped again, as if someone had flipped a switch. I stood there, panting, hand still on the door, too afraid to look back, but knowing deep down that something was still there. My hand was still gripping the door handle when I heard a sudden thud behind me. I froze, my pulse pounding in my ears, louder even than my ragged breathing. I knew I should turn around, but every instinct was screaming at me to stay still, not to look. But curiosity got the better of me. Slowly, painfully slowly, I glanced back over my shoulder. That's when I saw him, the janitor. But something was different. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear, and he was looking right at me like he'd been searching for me all night. His clothes were disheveled, his once neat uniform now covered in grime and sweat, like he'd been running too. "Thank God I found you," he whispered, his voice barely above a breath. Before I could even react, he grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the door, dragging me down the hall toward a nearby classroom. My legs were shaky, my mind racing to catch up. Was this real? Could I trust him? I opened my mouth to ask, but he cut me off before I could say anything. "Shoo, keep quiet," he hissed, looking over his shoulder as if he expected something to come charging around the corner at any second. "He's looking for you." I didn't even have time to process his words before we were inside the classroom. He shut the door quickly, but as quietly as possible, locking it with trembling hands. The fluorescent lights flickered above us, giving the room an eerie glow, but the whispers that had haunted me earlier seemed to fade, replaced by an oppressive silence. For a moment, all I could do was lean against the wall, gasping for breath. My head was spinning, heart racing, and my knees still ached from the fall earlier. I looked at the janitor, who was pacing the room like a caged animal, his eyes darting to the windows and the door. His nervous energy was contagious. I forced myself to speak. Who's looking for me? What's going on? My voice came out shaky, barely louder than a whisper. He stopped pacing and stared at me, his eyes wide and filled with a fear I didn't understand. He's been here for years. You should have never stayed this late. He doesn't like it when people stay after dark. That's when he hunts. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The janitor was rambling like a madman, but something about the look in his eyes told me he wasn't lying. Who's he? I asked, dread creeping into my voice. The janitor took a deep breath, glancing at the door like he was expecting it to burst open at any second. They call him the keeper. He never left the school. Not even after. He stopped suddenly, clenching his jaw, like the words were too much for him to say. You need to understand, he's not human. Not anymore. I stared at him, struggling to make sense of what he was saying. Not human? What do you mean? Like a ghost? The janitor shook his head, his face pale under the flickering lights. Worse than that, he's something else. I don't even know what, but he's real, and he's here. I've seen him. The room felt colder with each word he spoke, like the walls were closing in on us. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. How do we get out of here? I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. He ran a hand through his greasy hair, clearly as desperate as I was. There's no way out. Not until morning. The doors, they're locked. I've tried them all. My stomach sank. I had already checked the doors myself. But hearing him confirm it made the reality of the situation sink in even more. We were trapped. We just need to keep quiet, stay hidden until it's light out. He doesn't come out during the day. We just need to make it through the night. His voice shook, and the way he kept glancing at the door made it clear he wasn't confident in our chances. Suddenly, the lights flickered violently, casting sharp shadows across the room. The whispers started again, faint at first, like they were creeping under the door. I jumped, my breath catching in my throat. The janitor's eyes went wide. He's here, he whispered, backing away from the door. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. I backed up toward the window, hoping maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to break it and escape. But it was too high, and the old glass looked thick. I never make it out that way. The janitor grabbed the flashlight from my hand and switched it off, plunging us into near darkness, save for the faint light from the flickering bulbs. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us like a windstorm, echoing off the walls. The same phrase came through, clear as day now. He's coming. He's coming. I couldn't stand it anymore. What does he want? I asked, trying not to let my voice break, though fear was gripping my throat. The janitor didn't answer. He was staring at the door, his knuckles white as he gripped the flashlight. I've seen him before. He's been here for years, but no one talks about it. Every now and then, someone stays too late, and they don't leave. His voice cracked on the last word. I wanted to scream, to bolt out of the room, but my legs were frozen in place. The whispers kept getting louder, more frantic, and I could feel something in the air, like a pressure building, waiting to explode. Then there was a loud bang on the door. Both of us jumped. The janitor fumbled with the flashlight, his hand trembling so much he could barely keep hold of it. He motioned for me to stay quiet, but I didn't need the reminder. Every muscle in my body was tense, waiting, ready to run at the first sign of danger. Another bang, louder this time. The door rattled on its hinges. The janitor whispered, "If he finds us, there's nothing we can do." I clenched my fists, trying to think, trying to plan, but my brain was too foggy, too panicked to come up with anything. The only thing I could focus on was that door and the horrifying thought that whatever was on the other side was coming for us. The banging on the door grew louder, more aggressive, as if something was trying to tear its way through. The janitor stood frozen next to me, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. I could feel the fear radiating off him, and it only made my own panic worse. Every second felt like an eternity, and I knew we couldn't just stand there, waiting for whatever was out there to break through. "We have to go," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the banging. I didn't know where we could go, but staying in that room felt like a death sentence. The janitor shook his head frantically, his grip tightening on the flashlight. "There's nowhere to run. He'll find us." The door rattled again, harder this time. It was starting to give. I could see the wood splintering near the hinges. My heart raced, every instinct screaming at me to move, to do something. I looked around the room, desperate for a way out. The window was too high, the door was about to break, and the whispers were growing louder, filling the room with that haunting chant, "He's coming. He's coming." I couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't going to just stand there and wait to die. I grabbed the janitor by the arm. "Come on, we have to try." Before he could protest, I pulled him toward the back of the classroom, where there was a small storage closet. It wasn't much, but it was the only option we had. We squeezed inside, barely fitting in the cramped space, and I shut the door behind us as quietly as I could. The janitor switched off the flashlight, plunging us into complete darkness. For a moment, all we could do was stand there, huddled together in the tiny closet, listening to the sound of our own breathing. The whispers were still there, but they felt distant now, like they were coming from the walls themselves, echoing through the building. The banging on the classroom door had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow even worse. Then we heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving down the hallway just outside the classroom. My breath caught in my throat. The janitor squeezed my arm, as if to tell me to stay still, stay quiet. I nodded, though he couldn't see me in the darkness. The footsteps were getting closer. I could hear the faint creak of the floorboards under the weight of something heavy. My mind raced with images of what could be out there. What kind of creature was stalking us through the school? The janitor had said it wasn't human, but what did that mean? I didn't want to find out. The footsteps stopped right outside the closet door. I held my breath, trying to stay as still as possible. The janitor was trembling beside me, his grip on my arm so tight it hurt. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure whoever, or whatever, was out there could hear it. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, and for a brief, fleeting moment I thought maybe, just maybe, it had left. Then the doorknob rattled. A cold wave of terror washed over me. The door shook again, harder this time, like something was testing it, trying to get in. I clamped my hand over my mouth, trying to keep quiet, but I could feel the panic rising in my chest, threatening to explode. The janitor was muttering under his breath, too low for me to hear, but I could sense his fear, his hopelessness. The door rattled again, and I was sure it was going to burst open at any second. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the shaking stopped. The footsteps moved away, slowly, fading into the distance until all we could hear was the faint hum of the building and the whispers echoing through the walls. We stayed there for what felt like hours, neither of us daring to move or speak. My legs were cramping, and my throat was dry, but I didn't care. As long as we stayed quiet, we might make it out of this alive. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the janitor spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I think he's gone." I nodded, though the tightness in my chest wouldn't let me relax just yet. Slowly, carefully, I opened the closet door, peeking out into the dark classroom. It was empty. The door was still intact, though splintered around the edges. I stepped out, motioning for the janitor to follow me. "We need to find another way out," I said, my voice shaking. "There has to be something we missed." The janitor nodded, though he looked defeated, like he didn't believe there was any escape. But I couldn't give up. Not now. Not after everything. We crept through the classroom, stepping carefully to avoid making any noise. The whispers had quieted, but I could still hear them, faint but ever present, like they were lurking just beyond the walls, waiting for the right moment to strike. We made our way back into the hallway, and that's when I saw it. The front entrance, the same doors that had been locked tight earlier, were now standing wide open. I froze, staring at the doors in disbelief. "They're open," I whispered. "We can get out." The janitor looked at the doors, then back at me, his expression filled with confusion and doubt. "How? How are they open?" "I don't know," I admitted, my heart racing. But we're not waiting around to find out. We didn't need to say anything more. We both ran for the doors, our footsteps echoing in the hallway. I didn't look back, didn't even dare to. My mind was filled with only one thought: escape. I felt the cool night air hit my face as we burst through the doors and out into the schoolyard. I turned to look for the janitor, ready to thank him for helping me, but he wasn't there. Panic shot through me as I scanned the empty schoolyard, but he was gone. Vanished just like that. It didn't make any sense. That's when I saw it. A plaque on the wall near the entrance. It was old, worn, but the engraving was still visible. It was a memorial, honoring staff members who had passed away while working at the school. My stomach twisted as I read the names. There, near the bottom, was the janitor's name. He had died 20 years ago. A cold chill ran down my spine, and for a moment, I stood frozen, trying to wrap my mind around what had just happened. I had been running through the school with someone who wasn't even alive. Without another thought, I turned and ran, not stopping until I was far away from that place, the whispers fading into the distance behind me.